Yo, what up? How's it going? And welcome back for another video. Today's video, we're going to be doing a patch notes rundown for 10.3. In this patch rundown, we're going to be talking mostly about pro play, but also going to be talking about maybe changes that'll impact solo queue and that type of stuff as well. Been trying to film this for like 2 hours, but Windows just update. You know how that goes. So with that out of the way, let's just get right into the video. Okay, so here's the screen. These are the major changes over the patch. This is a pretty large patch. Has all the changes to XP in the jungle that everybody's been asking for. It's actually a really small page of it, but it's going to be pretty impactful. A lot of nerfs to the meta AD carries, and also a lot of changes to support. And, you know, your boy Corki and Azir got to get it in now. You know, pro play started, so they got to get in there. Cool, so let's just like dive right into it. So Akali is getting a huge nerf, a huge change, and let's talk about it. Okay, so as promised, we've done some major work on Akali that's going live this patch. These changes are a result of her presence in pro play and aim to trim power their more than everyday players. Okay, cool. Yeah, so Akali, everybody knows what a menace Akali's have been. So the cost of 5-point strike is going up. So this is definitely going to affect her wave clear in the early game. So making her being picked mid lane feel even worse than maybe it already felt. I mean, Akali is super OP, but in terms of her wave clear early game is bad. You know, that's one of the drawbacks of playing Akali, is that her ability to get lane prio early in mid lane is not very good. And so nerfing this right here to make it cost 20 more at rank 1 is pretty impactful, and 20 more it's 20 more at all ranks. That's pretty nice. As well as one big change to this is everybody taking presence of mind on Akali to get the additional energy. So that's why it stays prevalent all the way to the late game. So this is a really nice change for Akali's early game clearing. Twilight Shroud, her movement speed is now a decaying movement speed after 2 seconds on cast. So she doesn't just get this the whole time. Pretty huge nerf. The amount of movement speed is buffed up. This does still help her escape, but that like annoying thing where she's just running around in circles inside the thing, dodging everybody's skill shot, will be less doable, at least for her. Okay, here's the big change. So the 5-point strike change is pretty big, but here's the big change right here, is her R1 is now a targeted ability. I think a lot of people were confused when this came out, because I would read on Twitter and stuff like that. They were like, Akali's R is now a point quick? Riot, that's not balanced. But the whole point of this change right here, if you just don't know, is to change the use cases of her R. So the only use case for this ability now is to attack an enemy champion with it. And so her use cases for escaping with this ability is before you pick any direction you want, you can jump over a wall to get into a fight. Now you can only use it to target on enemy champion. So your ability to escape or engage onto fights, like jump over a wall to get your first part of the R off, is put down significantly. And a lot of times you might see if someone lands their E, they'll use their R backwards, their first part of their R, and then use their E so that whenever they land, they can execute the target, rather than whenever they land, R1ing them, not doing enough damage to execute them, and then they flash away or flash over a wall, and now it's harder for you to execute them. So the use cases for this ultimate is changed really significantly. So in solo queue, this champion, especially in mid lane, is going to feel a lot worse. So in mid lane, this champion is going to feel a lot worse because of the energy change. Your ability to actually get lane prio early is going to feel really bad if the enemy is actually picking champions where they get lane priority. And the matchups where Akali is favored, this doesn't change all that much, because you're not worried about lane prio in the matches that you're favored. You know, other melee champions don't typically have very good lane priority in the first place, so those matchups in the mid lane aren't going to feel as good, or are still going to feel fine, the melee matchups. And top lane, this change isn't that impactful because lane priority isn't super impactful. Top lane it is, but it's more about trading, and so this is going to limit your ability to trade slightly. But she already beat up on tanks and stuff like that anyways. Akali did in lane. I do think this nerf is going to be enough to make it to where she's not super prevalent in pro play. This champion still has so many things in her kit, like all the dashes. She has 4 dashes in her kit still, right? She can go invisible. That's still a thing that is super valuable. But the number tuning and the targeted direction is going to make it to where she actually has counterplay. which will make it more interesting to see if this just kills her in pro play altogether. Her being a legitimate flex is going to be hurt. There's actually a downside to picking this champion mid lane now, right? If you pick this mid lane and somebody else picks, you know, a perma prio champion like Syndra, Lissandra, something like that, champions that are already been prevalent in the meta. Lissandra's been getting banned for some reason, but those types of champions are going to feel a little bit nicer. And so Akali is going to be, you know, not a super flexible champion anymore. It'd be really interesting to see what happens in pro, but I would guess that this champion is still for sure playable in pro, because she was so broken before, has some good matchups, is a pretty safe blind in the top lane still, but actually has some counter matchups, actually has some things you can play into her. So I do like this change. I mean, Akali is just so hard to balance. I don't know what they should be doing with Akali, but at least this is going to make it most likely not permabanned every game and actually has some counterplay. I think you can leave this open and pick something like a Syndra and just perma shove her in and just roll over the enemy team in the early game, because she can't match in lane priority. Make plays with your jungle, have a powerful mid jungle duo like Lee Sin, Syndra, stuff like that. If you're playing this in solo queue, you can still play it in top lane. I think it's going to be hard to play this in solo queue in mid lane for the lack of lane priority, unless it's a good matchup into like other melees. She's still going to be good into other melees and stuff like that. Okay, Aphelios is getting his cube marked attack range no longer infinite. I don't think this change is very meaningful. So it used to do infinite range, which was why. Now it has 1800 range. For reference, Caitlyn's attack range is 650, which is about 3/4 of your screen or 2/3 of your screen. So this is going to be still like 3 screens wide, almost 1800 range. So I don't know how this changes much, other than someone teleporting away or someone has an ability to go very far away, like a Nocturne, something like that. I don't think this really changes much at all. So this is kind of a weird change. I think Aphelios definitely has some counterplay right now anyways. I know that's probably a controversial statement to say. But yeah, so I guess this is a nice change. It was kind of whack that he had infinite range. Now it's 1800, which is still like 3 screens. So it's kind of like not a meaningful change in my opinion. Okay, the Emperor has seen better days. So Azir has been getting some slow buffs constantly. And I think this buff is pretty meaningful, especially with Akali nerfs. Now this champion is a little bit more pickable. So this mana buff right here is pretty nice. His base mana value is up. So Azir has, one of the strengths of Azir is his ability to get lane priority, but the mana cost is pretty high because of some changes to his Q patches way far ago. But with this a little bit of extra mana value, he actually becomes not just a scaling champion. This actually helps him to not just be a scaling champion, but actually a champion that can play the lane a little bit better. He's already good in the melees and stuff like that, but to actually match with other control mages like Syndra. Hopefully this puts him in a spot where he can actually match. The soldier changes is pretty nice right here. So just an additional soldier. They've been messing around with his ultimate a lot. They added damage and decreased mana value, I believe, in a recent patch. So this is a nice little change. I really do think Azir will start to pop up a lot more in pro play. Especially you can start throwing bans at other things. If Akali does turn out to not be as prevalent, then you can start to throw bans at some of the stuff that Azir doesn't want to see, and can actually make him feel pretty nice. I do think this champion is going to show up in pro play. If you're playing in solo queue, if you were playing Azir before, then you're still playing Azir. If you weren't playing Azir before, this isn't enough to make you play Azir, because this champion does take a long time of mastery and stuff like that. So if you weren't playing Azir before, maybe you can give him a try, but just know that these changes aren't going to make it feel crazy impactful. This is more for higher end play, like pro play, and people who play Azir a lot. This is a meaningful change for them. Okay, Corki is getting changed. I'm actually a pretty big fan of these Corki changes. So Corki's been slowly getting buffed along with Azir. We're about to have a Corki Azir meta, guys. Maybe. But these changes are really impactful for pro play. So the damage per second is increased. Isn't super impactful, and now has an attack damage ratio, which is pretty awesome because or the attack damage ratio is buffed pretty significantly. It already had an attack damage ratio, but it's buffed pretty significantly. The ability power one is buffed, and that's nice, I guess. But but that's pretty nice right there to do the additional damage. It also burns for a half second longer. So this damage that it was dealing right there per second is going to be up 50% as well, even without the buff right here. So that's a pretty nice change. You don't end up actually hitting people with this ability that much. Like, what I mean by that, like they don't stand on it for that long because it does knock them away. But what this ability does do is it creates a zone of control of, you know, if you ult on the backside of your team, backside of the enemy team, like you do like a flank, and they're trying to escape, they'll actually be penalized a little bit more for walking over this ability. Feel a lot more like a, you know, like a Rumble ultimate. Like if you're trying to escape a fight and there's a Rumble ultimate on the back of your team, you do not want to walk through that because you know you're going to lose 1/3 of your health. So this will start to feel a little bit more like that, right? So actually disincentivize people from knocking away. This right here is an amazing change. So Carrier Pigeon now slows champions that are directly hit and knocked to the side. So before, if you're unfamiliar with how the package works, you hit them with the package, it knocks them to the side. And it just kind of knocks them to the side and they're like, okay, you can use this to knock people into your team and stuff like that. But now that it slows is going to be really nice because if you knock them, if you put it behind them, like I'm imagining, like you're kind of like doing like a Corki flank, you put it behind them, you knock them towards your team, and then they have to try to escape and they're slowed, and then they're going to immediately walk onto your special delivery, which is going to burn them additionally right there. So that's going to feel really bad for them. This is a really cool change because it's putting power into like the higher case, like the high specialty use case of Corki, right? It's putting power into like a more advanced play in the Corki, actually setting up flanks, stuff like this. So this champion, if you were playing it in solo queue, is pretty decent. It's pretty blind, safe blind pick. It does have some issues with, you know, a lot of solo queue games will have a lot of action early on. He does have a little bit of issue of getting in there and participating. So if you're playing this in solo queue, if you're already playing it, this is a really nice change. If you aren't playing it, maybe give Corki a try. He's been getting some slow buffs throughout there. But in pro play, I do think this is going to be enough to put Corki into pro play. It'll be very interesting if Corki Azir starts to become a thing. Pro players really like playing the champions too. They feel very safe. They're really good blind picks. So I do think we might start to see these champions pop up. This change is really huge. I think this change is really, really, really huge and really cool too, because it adds like higher level play to this champion, you know, where this champion normally is just sitting there auto attacking you. So I do like this. Okay, Dianna is getting some nerfs. So before I even talk about the specific nerfs, if you've been watching LEC or LCS, you may have heard a lot of the analysts talk a lot about how Dianna is like secret OP, and the only person who's really been playing it is Nemesis. Nemesis is a Dianna fiend. The only person who's really been playing it is Nemesis, and he played it in pro play and stuff like that too. And I've been talking about how this champion is secret OP. I tend to agree with that a little bit. I don't think it's like crazy OP, but one of the issues Dianna has, and one of the big changes to Dianna, we go all the way back to when she was initially reworked, and I even said this, whenever they changed a lot of her mana values and her mana costs, they made it to where she can actually really safely farm with her Q in bad matchups. And so that was a thing on Dianna before, is you had to farm with your Q and you had to go a mana build, right? You had to go, had to build Roa and stuff like that, and you could farm with your Q in bad matchups. That was like old Dianna stuff. And like that was okay, but it forced you into that Roa build, and that's why Roa was like really prevalent, is Dianna had some really awful matchups, but she had to farm with her Q. Now that Dianna has her jump on her E, has her dash on her E, her matchups already that were bad already don't feel as bad as they were before, because you can actually trade in lane at level 3, whereas before, you know, you weren't even a champion to level 6. And then her mana values got buffed as well whenever she got reworked. So farming with her Q is much easier, and you just go for that proto belt first item, which is an amazing first item, and then you can build some mana after that if you want to, or never build mana, just take presence of mind. So this mana nerf right here is significant in matchups where she was already at a deficit, right? So matchups that didn't feel very good and she needed to farm with her Q, this nerf is making it to where that is more difficult to do, and will maybe in tougher matchups force you into like a Roa style build, or, you know, a mana build and stuff like that. So this is making it to where her matchups that feel bad feel worse. Her matchups where they were already fine, this isn't a huge change because you didn't need to use your Q to farm anyways. You could farm with your auto attacks. But in matchups where you had to farm with your Q, this is a pretty heavy nerf, because it actually forces you into a different build path, or maybe, well, you know, makes it a little bit more difficult to play lane unless you get forced into other build path. Okay, her shield The damage is being reduced a little bit, so it's $4 ranks. Okay, so small damage nerf. I don't mind that much. This champion's very good still. This is going to make it's incredibly hard to blind pick her now, I think, because this mana nerf right here, I think makes it really difficult for her to blind pick. Okay, Ekko is getting nerfed in the jungle. You look, I don't know what just came out of my mouth. Honestly, the mana nerf, or the XP nerf, or not XP nerf, Jesus, the passive nerf to Ekko is probably warranted. And solo queue, this champion's pretty strong. And I was surprised that this champion didn't leak into pro play already. You know, we still saw Kiana in pro play this last weekend because that champion's very strong, but I was really surprised we didn't see Ekko creep back into pro play in the jungle. And so with the jungle XP being buffed on this patch and being changed, I do think that this nerf is kind of needed so that this champion isn't like a crazy flex, especially with Akali hopefully out of the meta. It'd be pretty insane to be able to blind pick Ekko because you can flex him into the jungle. That'd be pretty insane. So this nerf is pretty needed for professional play specifically, and especially with Krugs getting buffed and stuff like that. I do think this buff or this nerf is needed. If you're still playing this champion, I still think it's going to be fine in the jungle, but this is making it where it's harder to flex him in mid lane. But this champion is still probably fine in the jungle, but unlikely to see it in pro play now with these changes. But maybe we'll start to see it. Maybe we'll still see it in pro play because of the Akali nerfs, and this will be a legitimate flex. If this didn't get changed right here, I think Ekko would be a terror in pro play because there's a lot of people who like playing in mid lane already, and you could just blind them for jungle, which would be pretty insane if you could just blind Ekko. Okay, Ezreal, his mana growth is getting buffed and his attack speed growth is getting buffed. So Ezreal has already started to get played a little bit in pro play, and with the changes to Cinna and Aphelios, I mean, Aphelios is still going to be the same basically. Maybe Ezreal priority will go up slightly. I don't think this champion is still pretty, pretty bad in solo queue if you're wanting to play this, especially if you're a lower ELO player, stuff like that. It's really hard to play around an Ezreal in solo queue because your ability to get lane priority is pretty down. Your ability to trade in lane is a lot down. You're still feeling the changes from the E nerf forever ago, but this attack speed growth is pretty nice. The mana growth is a little nice. It's just nice for that mid game Ezreal. So Ezreal will feel a little bit more strong in the mid game where he feels really strong, and the late game scaling that he actually has now will feel nice. Especially, a lot of people are taking Conquer, Lethal Tempo, Omnistone. This does feel a little bit nice. The attack speed growth is kind of interesting because with a lot of the melees in the meta, maybe you'll start to see the Frozen Fist build again, especially with, with Ornn in the meta, obviously you can upgrade Trinity Force and Frozen Fist. If you have Ornn on your team, you probably want to have Trinity Force. I believe the upgrade is more highly valued, but it does lead to some options of building the Frozen Fist build because there's a lot of melees popping up in the meta right now, so which that item's really good against melee champion. So just a nice little buff. In solo queue, I don't think this changes anything with the champion. The reason why the champion kind of sucks in solo queue, he's always not been great in solo queue. He's hard to play around, but also the E nerf, his ability to trade in lane is reduced significantly. But this is really nice for professional play, people who are already playing it, and really nice for for making that mid game spike and that late game powerhouse that Ezreal can be sometimes makes it feel a little bit better. Doesn't change in lane, so I think this champion's still very hard to play in solo queue, but maybe his prio and professional play will go up a little bit. Cool. Galio is getting a buff. Very interesting because Galio is already very strong actually and has been showing up in pro play a little bit, especially in the LCK played tonight. He was already showing up. I think this champion is very strong. I do not think this champion needed a buff, so it's very interesting. So the tornado duration is up half a second and will do an additional tick of damage. So his Q will just deal more damage. Most of the damage in the Q is put into the first part of it in the first place. This really helps him with shoving lane because sometimes whenever you're starting out in the early game and you Q the backline minions and you go into auto attack it with your passive, sometimes you'll be left with like 10 HP. So maybe this will be changing it to where it does actually kill the minions by themselves and helps Galio get a little bit more prio. Galio has already been showing up a little bit as a flex and support in mid, and he was already a pretty decent champion, especially with a lot of the melee supports popping out. Galio is very good into melees. He's very good into people who want to engage onto him. So I already think Galio is very strong. He just wasn't as good as the other support picks that were being picked. But this change right here does help a lot in support. as well, because something you can do with Galio, he's one of the very few melee supports that can actually help you get the lane pushed. You can throw your Q through the melees and land it on the backline minions with this extra tick of damage. It's pretty nice. I do think we're going to start seeing Galio and pro play as a legitimate flex between mid and support. We already saw in the LCK before this buff, so this buff is kind of weird because I think Galio was already in a pretty decent spot, so this is pretty weird. Leona is getting nerfed, so her damage is getting nerfed. I think this is a good direction for her. So she's taking 10 off at 3rd rank, and then also 20 off at max rank, and you do end up maxing this pretty early, and then 10 off at all ranks on this ability. I do think this is a helpful change. I don't mind Leona at all being a super tank. You know, Leona and Alistair are like the two supports that are like highly gold efficient super tanks. I don't mind that at all. I don't mind Leona being very tanky. What I do mind is Leona being able to 1v1 junglers and AD carries. I don't understand how that is a thing that she has that. I don't know if this is meaningful enough. I think this will probably change like 20% of the time that Leona was solo killing people. I do think this will change this, but a lot of times Leona is like overkilling her opponents. Not really like how like Aatrox overkills with a Q where he does like 700 damage in mid game. And they only have 300 health. What I mean by overkilling is like she'll use her whole combo and she'll still have 50% of her health, and her CDs will be about to come back up, and the enemy AD carry or jungler will already be dead after 1.5 rotations of her abilities, and she'll have 50% of her health still. So I think it'll change like 20% of the cases where she was just solo killing her opponents, which was like super fucked in the first place, that she was able to do that. So this change is nice, and especially some other changes, some other sports is going to feel nice. Okay, Misfortune is doing well in all skill brackets. So I heard attack speed growth is down just a little bit. I don't think this is meaningful at all. It's just like a small little nerf. I think this champion is very, very, very good in solo queue. I think at pro play, this champion's a little bit of a bait a lot of the times. I guess a nice nerf because it's weird that she has so much attack speed without building any. So I think this is nice. I don't think this is going to change her build pattern or anything like that, but it's just a nice little nerf. Not very meaningful in my opinion. Okay, Rumble. So cleaning up some of the stuff. So Rumble is getting his scrap shield is the main thing that changed. This right here is just rounding the numbers and nothing meaningful right here. The scrap shield is reducing the movement speed and the enhanced movement speed right here, and reducing the shield health by 20 at rank 1. It's not changed at max rank, and that's an important thing right there. So this change is really nice because Rumble is one of the very few champions that is a very legitimate flex between mid and top because he gets lane priority so easily. His top matchups, the things that are meta, don't feel bad for him really. And he's very good into a lot of the meta picks. So this change right here is making Rumble more gankable because Rumble just wants to free shove the mid lane, and then when people come to gank him, he just slows them and scrap shields away, which does feel sometimes not as much counterplay. Whereas Rumble's not a high mobility champion, he is a very gankable champion, but with the scrap shield the way it was at this time and comboed with the slow, it was very difficult to actually secure a kill on the Rumble. And so with this, where he wants to perma shove the lane, this changes me. Somebody's honking outside. This change is pretty meaningful because the movement speed is pretty 5% reduced, which is not super huge, but the shield being reduced at rank 1 and through rank 2 is pretty significant because you don't want to max this ability second. You want to max this ability third. You want to have your slow damage. Dude, somebody is constantly honking outside. It is so annoying. I know you guys probably can't hear it, but anyways, it's distracting. So it's down by 20, which is pretty significant for the early for ganking them early on in the game and for his trading patterns, because you don't end up putting points into this till like level 10, something like that, after you already have 1 point in it. So I don't think this is going to change putting points into it. Maybe in tough matchups, if you get a tough matchup into him, maybe they'll start put some points into this. But really, you want to put points to your slow to help with your damage and your Leandries that you're going to be building. So this nerf is pretty nice. Maybe it will allow Rumble to be picked a little bit more often instead of permaban almost every single game. This champion's still going to be very good because he's one of the few legitimate flexes in the game right now. Okay, Sejuani's getting changed. So they're changing her passive and her attack speed. This attack speed is really nice right here because one of the issues with Sejuani is he's a really good talisman jungler, right? And some of the talisman camps just aren't as good to do anymore. You could go a machete build and do the 3 camp clear, but you would lose a lot of health. With this attack speed growth right here actually makes it to where she is kind of powerful level 3, right? Because this attack speed growth right here allows her to actually do the machete clear pretty nicely, which is really, really nice. And also, whenever she does her initial first gank, I don't know if you guys remember, but before they had stat runes, you would, on Sejuani, before they had stat runes, you would take fleet footwork sometimes. So you could get the attack speed from the precision tree, because that 10% attack speed you get from precision tree was really nice. So now you'll be able to take 20% with the stat rune and this. So this actually is a really nice buff that is going to lend to allowing her to be played in pro play, I think. You know, because we already have Camille showing up and stuff like that. Early picking Sejuani and then picking Camille for counter pick if people don't have enough bans for that with certain teams. Getting Camille, getting a Renekton, something like that. I do think Renekton's kind of but those melee laners, combo with Sejuani is very good. Might start to see the Sejuani Yasuo combo, because Gragas gets banned so often. So we might start to see that. So this change is really interesting, but it's comboed with the passive change. So her bonus resist that's on her passive and the slow resist now will get taken off by all monsters, not just epic monsters. So what this change actually does as well is it lends to, if the enemy team has prio and they push into your jungle to gank you, you won't have that frost armor if you're clearing a camp. So it's actually easier for champions to jump into your jungle and kill you early, like something like a J4 or something like a Zen. Champions that can actually attack you level 2 is going to feel, if they actually do go for those types of plays, will actually feel like they have a chance of killing you, right? So it's buffed Sejuani's ability to gank early by this. And this change also will make it to where she's a little bit more squishier in the jungle, so that makes it where she probably has the same health values after doing this type of clear. Very cool change, I think. I think we might start to see Sejuani in play, especially if people are able to stop banning Akali, if they're able to not ban Akali anymore and use that ban on maybe Gragas. Gragas is very strong at the moment. Then we might start to see Sejuani as like the substitute for Gragas. She does a lot of things that what Gragas does as well. She's just not as strong as an early game champion right now. So that's very interesting changes. I'm really hyped if we start to see some Sejuani combos. I know Sejuani is kind of a boring champion, but it's really interesting when she combos with like Camille and Yasuo, stuff like that. Okay, Cinna. So Cinna is getting changed pretty significantly. This is a really long patch, guys. Okay, so this change is kind of complicated. So 20% on minions, Cinna doesn't kill. So that's her soul drop chance, which is a big part of her damage. And 100% on cannon minions, Cinna kills. So before, 20% of the time it'll drop a soul, and then she gets a soul on 100% of the chance of the cannon minions killed. Okay, now it's going to be 25% on minions Cinna doesn't kill, so that's pretty significant. And then 1.6% on cannon minions Cinna kills. So now on AD carry, you will basically no longer get souls from cannon minions. So it's about the same soul drop rate. Pretty big change. We'll talk about this in just a second because that has to do with support. Pretty huge change. It's probably going to take her completely out of pro play, honestly, as an AD carry. As an AD carry, at least. Probably going to take her completely out of pro play and just kill AD carry Cinna. It was already starting to not be played, and there's starting to be counterplay to the champion. One of the big issues with picking Cinna as AD carry is it does really weird things to your draft. It makes your Baron clear really small unless you can get something like a Cassio or Ryze into your comp, but you don't always get the matchups that you want to have in that. So it already did very weird things for your comp. It does make your mid-game ability to clear waves very bad. She's very good at clearing waves early on in the game, but your mid-game thing. So a lot of teams are already not taking prio on the champion. I watched the LCK today, and a lot of teams were just not even caring about this champion at all. So I do think this probably kills AD carry Cinna. A lot of your damage was in the passive, and a lot of teams were starting to not play this champion anymore anyways. This is 10.3, so if you watch pro play this week, they're probably still going to be on 10.2. So it's just still being played. Okay, this change right here, minion kills via Spoils of War, Relic Shield, and Steel Shoulder Guards unique that Cinna gets credit for now count as kills by Cinna. So that means if you go the Relic Shield or Steel Shoulder Guards, which is like they're both like Relic Shield, right? You will no longer get souls from those kills. You'll get it as if you were playing AD carry Senna. And so the reason why they do that change is because they made a whole freaking item in the game just for Senna support. They made the sickle. So they want you to use that item. So the big thing that's important about this is that Senna as support, especially in solo queue, and I do think she's playable in pro play in very niche situations. I'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the big problems as a support champion is her ability to kill the minion wave really early on. Like, she has an insane ability to get lane priority because you can queue the entire minion wave, and then you can auto attack the cannon at like 50% health, and it'll one-shot it, right? So it's like way too OP for her to be able to queue the entire minion wave and then get 2 free minion kills on a cannon wave. That's like way too OP. So that's why that's being changed. They wanted to use literally her support item, the sickle. So it's made for her, spectral sickle. This bug fix, I had no idea this did this. When she died, it would camouflage her enemies still. No idea that was a thing. Okay, so I just mentioned that playable in support and pro play. So she's playable in support and pro play. If people keep blinding Tahm Kench and Braum, if a lot of teams have been blinding those champions, and if they blind those champions, you can bet your ass you can play Cinna support. Why wouldn't you be able to? If they blind champions like that, but if they have, you cannot blind this champion as a support because they'll just pick Leona, Nautilus, stuff like that, and they'll pick a dive mid laner. But picking this, if the enemy blind picks Braum and Tahm Kench, which blows my mind of people doing that, then you can pick this champion. A lot of the mage supports are getting buffed, and the melee supports are getting nerfed, like Leona and stuff like that. So if Leona's not in the game, you can play Cinna, bro. And yeah, she hurts as support. So, and you're going to be getting all the souls. So I do think we're going to start seeing some mage supports. If people will play them. If someone blind picks Braum and Tahm Kench, bro, like there's so many range supports you can play. If they do that, the reason why you can't play range supports is because people pick Nautilus and Leona every game, and then if those are all gone away, you can pick Alistair, stuff like that, and then there's a lot of assassins, mid lane and jungle, stuff like that. That's the reason why you can't play that. But if they don't pick Leona and stuff like that, they blind Braum and they have like a Cassio mid, why not play Cinna support? You can totally do it. It's getting buffed. Okay, cool. All right, we'll rant over. Ooh, sheesh. Okay, Set is getting a little nerfed, which is kind of weird. I do think it's really awful he's getting nerfed. He does feel very nice in solo queue, but this nerf is like, sucks. So the health regen is down. The Haymaker change is kind of interesting. So the damage value is down 20 at, it's pretty close to the same early on, but it's 20 at max rank, which, you know, you max it first. So base value being nerfed is probably okay. The cooldown being changed is pretty significant. So at rank 3, and that's where it's really important to look at things. At rank 3, you're going to have 10% cooldown reduction by that time usually. So it's going to be like 13, give or take, seconds long at that time, or be 13 and a half. It'll be 13 at that time, which is going to be pretty big change compared to this would be like 10 and a half if it was this. So that actually makes it to where you can't get 2 rotations of this ability early on into the game, which is going to be very hard. Later on in the game, you're still going to be able to get 2 rotations of the ability, but you'll actually really need to pick your timings. You want to use this. You can still use it at the beginning of the fight and then hold it for when you want to get that big damage. Less likely to get 3 rotations of this unless you're in a very extended fight. So, still think this champion is pickable in pro play. Definitely still going to be strong in solo queue with these changes. Still going to be pickable in pro play, but I really think this champion didn't need to get changed at all. I think people just needed to get more time to see the counterplay to it, you know, because there's very easy counterplay. I think this champion just needed a little bit more time. I'm not happy with these changes. Do not think they're good. Okay, so Sona, the buff on the last patch is basically just getting reverted. I don't know why. Really, I know nobody likes to see Sona Tahm Kench, Sona Taric, stuff like that, but I don't think it was even that good. So EG played it, right? And maybe some other random teams from random regions around the world maybe played it. But the thing with Sona Tahm Kench or Sona Taric right now is I feel like it has a lot of counterplay. in the current meta. There's a lot of counterplay to it. It loses lane prio early, which is pretty bad. So it allows the other team to invest in dragons, or maybe just purely play to the other side of the map and not even care about your lane and not care about dragons, because no way you're getting dragons with Sona and Tahm Kench. So we can just avoid the dragons altogether, play for top side, play for split pushers. I think it has a lot of counterplay. And I think Sona Taric probably has a place. Sona Tahm Kench probably has a place. So I think it's weird that it got nerfed. I don't mind that being a strategy in the game. It's really bad when that's the best strategy in the game, but I don't think that it is. It has a lot of counterplay. So I think this change is pretty random, honestly. I think people were getting really scared of the support tops, but I don't know. I don't think it's like, I think it's good to have that as a alternate strategy. I don't think support tops or playing support AD carry is like the best thing in the game other than Cinna, but Cinna's getting changed. So, okay, Yuumi is getting buffed. Yay, Yuumi is getting buffed. So as I said before, they're buffing a lot of these range supports because everybody's blinding Tahm Kench and Braum for no reason. It doesn't make any sense to nerf those champions. They're not very strong by themselves. So, shoot, man. So I hope teams start to pick range supports, man, into the blinding Braum and Tahm Kenches of the world. Okay, so the empowered Q damage is getting changed a little bit. So the base value is slightly down, right? But they added a health ratio into this. So teams that are picking like Ornn, Braum, Tahm Kench, stuff like that. So when I did the math on this, by the time you have this maxed out and it's in mid game and you get to the mid game fights, which is what they want to buff, is their mid game. With this bonus attack ratio, once it's maxed out, it'll deal about, let's say somebody has 2,500 health, which is going to be like a Cinderhulk jungler, a solo laner who's building HP items, right? This is going to deal about 200 damage. I believe the scale's a level, not maxing, but it's going to deal about 150 to 200 additional damage. So that's a pretty nice buff if they're at max health. So it's buffing her ability to poke people down initially. So poke people down initially, not in fights. So her ability to do damage before fights start, which is what Yuumi should be able to do. She's a poke support, right? Yuumi, silence no longer counts as an immobilizing effect. That's very strange that it did in the first place. It's going to be a nice solo queue change. That is pretty weird that silence made her cooldown increase. I didn't talk about mana value, so 90 at all ranks is pretty nice as well. So it lets you max it. So they changed Yuumi to being an enchanter more than a poke support, and now they're changing her back to being a poke support. I think she belongs as a poke support because her being an enchanter and not having to do anything feels kind of weird. Okay, heal Yuumi. So the base value is getting slightly nerfed and the AP ratio goes up. So they're really just buffing her mid game, making her more into a mid game poke champion and less of an enchanter, which is a nice change. Definitely think this champion is pickable into all the people blinding Tahm Kench and stuff like that. So blinding Tahm Kench, Braum, stuff like that. So this is a nice change. I like this buff. This is nice. I think we'll start to see this unless if like Leona is not picked. So stuff like that. Okay, the long-awaited jungle changes, guys. We got the jungle changes coming out here fast. Whew. Okay. All right, so we have some changes to jungle XP right here. So this is going to look weird, this nerf right here. This is going to look weird, and this nerf right here. It's very important that you understand that they're buffing the 10 XP on all large monsters. So they just have to change this so that you don't get like crazy amount of XP on your first camp. That's all that is. That's all that changes. But they're buffing the initial XP on all the camps. They're also buffing Krug, so it's more of an option to go for that. They're also buffing or nerfing minion gold penalty, so it disincentivizes you going to clear your laner's lanes, like with something like Karthus or something like that. So it disincentivizes that. The Krug camp is getting buffed, so the total XP is up 15. So rejoice, you can clear this camp again, hopefully. But they're nerfing the gold value on the larger Krugs, which makes it to where you actually have to clear all of the Krugs to get the gold value. So that is a weird change because a lot of times you just want to kill all of the big and medium size ones. The medium base XP has gone up, so it's kind of weird. Something it also does is it makes it more difficult to counter jungle this camp, because you want to, when you counter jungle this camp, you just kill the large one and walk away, but you're not really taking that much from the enemy if you just kill the large one, because they're going to be happy with clearing all the medium sized ones, because the medium and small ones are where all the gold and XP are at now. So that's kind of weird. I mean, not that this camp was counter jungled that often, but it's just kind of weird. It makes it where you have to clear the whole camp, which I'm kind of fine with, but it makes it where Krugs is another option. I still think the most prevalent clear is going to be the Gromp in double buff because it's so fast and it gives you so much XP. So as I said, this is getting nerfed slightly. It's just because of the initial clear will be very weird, and the large monster XP is getting buffed in the first place. So to kind of counteract that, this change right here is pretty nice. So for example, if you're doing the Gromp clear where you do double buff Gromp, by the time it respawns, it's going to be level 4. So now it's getting an XP buff on that level 4, and then when you reset to kill it again to go do your ganks, when it resets again, it's gonna be either level 6 or level 7 when it spawns again. So this is actually a really nice change right here to give you more XP. So there's a lot more XP in the jungle now. Hopefully this will lead to not being 3 levels behind. I think you're still going to be slightly behind, but this probably makes junglers a little bit closer to a solo laner, which is probably okay, right? I do think late game junglers should not be as strong as a solo laner. That should be a thing. But hopefully now you can be 2 levels behind late game and not be 4 levels behind. I do think this is a buff for sure. I think a lot of people are going to trip on this, like it's getting nerfed 10 or 15 and 5. It's because of these changes and the initial queer. So I think it's a very small buff. I don't think it's super huge. I think it's very small. Probably going to make jungle in a much better spot feel a little bit more balanced. We're going to have to like kind of test this a little bit, kind of see how it goes, but this is a buff for sure. Not a huge one, kind of a small buff. Okay, Annie, is there bug changes? They said they put a lot of bug changes on this patch, but let's see if there's anything important. That's ARM. What the fuck? Okay. Now properly gives him 10% from Cloud buff. It didn't before on his ult. That's kind of whatever. I hope I'm not missing anything important on this, but I really don't want to read bug fixes forever because this video is already 40 minutes long. So anyways, guys, that's going to be it for the video. Let's do a little synopsis real quick, actually. So a lot of the mage supports are getting changed, getting buffed. Some of the melees have gotten nerfed. It's still going to be very difficult to blind like a champion like Cinna, a champion like Yuumi, without seeing if the enemy has an engaged support. But if the enemy is starting to pick Braum and Tom Kinch every game, which a lot of teams are doing, you can play Cinna support, man. If they're blinding stuff like that. I do think it's playable for sure. Love the Sejuani change. Makes it where her jungle query is a little bit quicker, but not but kind of counteracted to make her still the same amount of health value because it is going to be quicker. It makes her get on the map. Maybe going to be a replacement if Gragas starts to get banned a lot. Maybe you can start to pick Sejuani rather than Gragas. You can pair him with Yasuo's, Camille, stuff like that. Rumble getting changed, so just a little bit more gankable, but still going to be very strong. Misfortune, kind of a whatever nerf. Leona getting some of her damage taken out. It's kind of significant for her ability to 1v1 junglers and AD carries, which was super whack. Kind of takes a little bit of damage out of there. Galio getting buffed. We'll probably start to see him as a flex between mid and support. I think he's going to be good. Ezreal buff for pro play. Ekko getting nerfed in the jungle because with Akali out of the game, very likely, without getting any changes right here, he would become one of the best champions in the game because he can flex between jungle and mid, so you can actually blind him early on, red side, which would be insane, and blue side, which would be insane. Cool. Dianna getting nerfed, so her matchups that are unfavorable for her will feel even more unfavorable, maybe force her into a different build path. Corki and Azir going to be kings in the mid again, maybe. Folios nerf, it's kind of whatever. Akali, pretty gutted. Probably still playable in pro play and top lane. Going to be difficult to blind her mid lane, but we'll have some matchups where she's playable. All right, guys, that is it. I just breathed into the mic. I hate when I do that, but we're going to end this right here because this is taking way too long. I'm acting like a hype beast right now. Anyways, make sure you subscribe, all the good stuff. I don't care. Stuff I need to say on YouTube. And I'm going to see you guys on the next video. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.